Right. Good evening to everybody this evening. We're extremely excited to have you all on our live chat this evening. My name is Miranda van Dam. Right. I'm the chairperson. Good evening to everybody this evening. We're extremely excited to have you all on our live chat. Apologies for that. Let's just start again. We had an echo there. My name is Miranda van Dam, and I'm the chairperson of the AXPA Association, a support group for patients with AXPA in South Africa. The Voice of the Patient and Expert is a program designed to bring not only live witness, but also to educate and support you at home. Tonight, we welcome Professor Chris Scott. Developing ankylosing spondylitis, a form of arthritis as a child, piqued Professor Scott's interest in pediatrics. After studying medicine at the University of the Free State and graduating at the University of Cape Town, he worked in pediatrics in Guildford and other London hospitals. And then he came back to complete his training at the Red Cross Hospital in Cape Town. There was no training programs for pediatric rheumatology in South Africa and no registered pediatric rheumatologists. So he spent a year in Belgium on a Discovery Foundation scholarship in 2008. Then he spent some time in Italy, and he was supported by the Arthritis Foundation of South Africa and SARA. When he returned to South Africa, the Red Cross Hospital created a post for him with a dedicated pediatric rheumatology component. Professor Scott is now one of only 10 pediatric rheumatologists in South Africa, with a specialized interest in juvenile arthritis. He teaches pediatrics and rheumatology to medical students and advocates children's rights in equal access to health care. He has trained 6 pediatric rheumatologists since 2009 and is currently co-chair of the PRES Global Health Task Force. He is also part of a research team that collaborates with a number of universities across the world and studies various types of rheumatic diseases and their management in Africa, with a special focus on how they affect children in South Africa. And if these small patients are looking for proof that juvenile arthritis can be contained, he's climbed Kilimanjaro, cycled from Brussels to Paris, and goes in for long-distance trail running. Professor Scott, thank you so much for giving us your time and knowledge this evening. We know you specialize in pediatrics, but we thought we would kick off our chat asking about your journey with AXPA.
Thanks very much. It's really great to be here amongst my tribe, people who suffer from this condition. Yeah, my journey started, like many people, I bet you, I can't remember the first symptom. It was very indolent. It was impossible to describe the first symptoms and relate them to anything. But I do remember frequently having injuries or swollen knees or swollen joints and putting them down to other things, playing rugby or cricket or injuring myself. I didn't realize that nobody else around me was injuring themselves quite as much, but I put it down to my own enthusiasm and lack of skill. And so I can't really recall the first symptom, but I can remember always being hassled by joint issues from about early high school, I would say. And I can recall as well never sleeping particularly well and always having difficulties sitting for long periods, especially long car trips or airplane trips, or sitting for long periods in school. So those things all are just a big mishmash of memory in my mind, and the diagnosis was only made much later.
So at what age were you then diagnosed? Because obviously you've had symptoms, for quite a long time. when were you then given this incredibly complicated disease name that one can't
Well,
really spell?
you know, you'll be surprised. I mean, my parents were obviously well concerned about me and took me to many people to be seen. And when I started having backache a lot when I was studying, it was all put down to studying because I was trying to get into medical school and I was studying quite hard. And then through medical school, you know, there was just more studying to do, and then some late nights, and all of these things were always put down as not some late nights, many late nights, being on call, etc., and so on. And all of these things were just put down to problems with my mattress, or problems with my physique or my core. You know, one of the physiotherapists diagnosed me as having weak core muscles or something like to that effect. There was always something that could, something else, some other explanation. And it was only after I'd finished med school, so the penny didn't even drop when I got my lectures on ankylosing spondylitis, that I had it myself. And it was only after finishing med school, being a houseman, being a community service medical officer, seeing hundreds of people with backache and probably similar symptoms, that I bought a scooter when I worked in the United Kingdom, and I was one of those one-legged scooters, and I was scooting up and down, and my sacroiliac joints became really painful, and this scooting around eventually led me to go see someone, and they suggested I see a rheumatologist, and that's only when the penny dropped. And very surprising then that I'd been a doctor for 4 years or something by the time I was diagnosed, and I couldn't even diagnose myself. So that shows you what medical school teaches you about angst-spond. Maybe I was just not concentrating that day, but it also shows you how obscure the symptoms can be. Even when you look at my symptoms, they were absolutely classic. Now with a retrospective scope, it's easy to see, but at the time the pattern wasn't in my head, so I didn't realize. Yeah, so at about the age of 26 or 7, I was diagnosed.
Yeah, I think what you say rings true, that it's all happening. You don't really realize it's happening, and there's so many, the range of symptoms can be so broad, it can be very difficult to pin it down.
And so easy to blame on other things.
Yeah, I like the excuse that you were maybe studying too hard. I would have gone with that for a long time about you.
Yeah.
And what would you say was your, as from a patient's point of view, because we're now first talking to you about being an AXPOR patient. What was the frustrations for you? Obviously, you'd realize that something is not lacquer. You know, you can feel you're not okay. You first start realizing maybe you can't do things you normally used to do as comfortably as you could do it. What would you say was your main frustrations in this, this, and how's it influenced your lifestyle, your diagnosis as well?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will relate to this, but my biggest frustration initially was just, initially the frustration was not knowing what it was. I think there's several phases. Initially, just not knowing what it was, or that it even was a big problem, and just envisioning that life was just so terrible that everyone had as much backache as I did, and that nobody slept as well as I did, because I just assumed I was normal. So initially that not knowing that there was something to worry about was very frustrating. Then once I was diagnosed and started in treatment, and now knowing that it could be better, and sort of responding a little bit to some treatment and then not again to others, and having this up and down thing, there was this feeling of being tired of complaining, not wanting to burden others with my complaints, because they weren't changing, and one had a feeling that they weren't going to go away. So what's the point in complaining? And also, nobody likes a guy who's always complaining, and you're so you just stop, and you just, as I heard someone say on the radio today, you put it in the binnacle, you put it in the inside, and you just keep it there, and then but it's like a hot coal that's sitting somewhere in your shoe or somewhere in your lower back, and you just keep it there and kind of grin and bear it. But it's draining your batteries, and it's draining your will, your spontaneity and your ability to move freely and so on. So that was a big frustration. And then the third thing was, because I've always enjoyed sport and so on, is you've ended up the one guy with this, that with this problem, and and then you just become frustrated with yourself and disappointed in your own body, that it's let you down in this way. And it's hard to explain to people. No, I just can't come and play sport with you guys because it's my back. And then Chris, you're so old, blah blah blah. Your best meaning friends would give you these kinds of responses. Don't be such an old man, you can do it, come on, that kind of thing. So that frustration of just being frustrated with myself was rough. But I think the biggest thing is is that pain that you carry with you, that you just stop complaining about, because you also don't want other people to worry. That's a big thing. So once it became apparent that my wife, for instance, was worrying about me, it became even more important to internalize the pain, because there's nothing she's going to do this morning about it, so you just try and hold it in and get through the stiffest part of the morning. So I think those are some of the things.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is right, is that I tend to do that as well. I tend to just keep quiet about how I'm feeling, because I don't really want to say every day I'm feeling really bad or I'm in a lot of pain. But I think that in itself can cause a little bit of stress, because you actually are internalizing it. You're never really saying, today is not going well. But I'm a lot like you as well, where I prefer to just actually talk about it.
And I think what happens is, you start questioning yourself, and that's quite damaging. You get to a point where you're saying, well, is it really this bad? Am I just being lazy? Maybe it would be better if I just got off my backside and did something. Or maybe if I did this differently, or maybe if I lost some weight, I'd feel better this way or that way, this way or that way. And you start actually internalizing that, and in a way blaming yourself for the condition that you're in. And that's obviously not good for your mental health. And it's only once the pain was completely away, once I was completely in remission for that first period, that I realized what that all meant, and what that had all been doing to me. Then when you suddenly feel better, you suddenly go, wow, is this what other people are really feeling all the time? Is this how other people are sleeping? This is amazing. And then you're a bit, then you're even more frustrated because of all the years you've lost.
Yeah, true words. That's honestly, I think that's one of the things I think about also. It's when you have total pain-free days, and you can look at those pain days and go, actually, this normal feels nice,
Yeah.
And then you just hope that the bad days are shorter than the good days,
And also another thing is, just as I sit here thinking about it, I don't think many of us actually have a completely ever a pain-free day. It gets worse and it gets better, but perfect is not something I've ever managed to get to. I've been close, but yeah. So it is. It's always there, even if you're in remission, and there's always a worry that it'll get worse again. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And when you were telling me earlier about, you were participating in certain sports, and now you can't really maybe do it at that intensity or do it at that speed, it really becomes a head game then, where you need to say, well, okay, maybe you can't do this, but you should try, and there's no other things that you can do, that you can enjoy.
Yeah.
And not totally become, because that's something that was a danger for me. I was very active in mountain bike racing, but very, very active. I participated in the biggest, longest races, and I just my back couldn't take that bashing, and I had to stop. I actually had to stop because it was hurting me, and that was hectic for me, because I thought, well, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah,
And then
it's a lot. It's a real loss when you lose something like that partly identifies you as a person, is part of your life, is your happy place. And if you suddenly just have to amputate that part of you, I've often thought of it, it's like a physical loss. It's like losing a family member, you know, if you can't do something like that, because you literally lose a piece of yourself. So there was another thing I was going to say, but I think I interrupted you, and maybe my thing will come back.
And how do you, how do you manage your fatigue? That's the question that comes up a lot with I'm asking you as a patient now. I mean, you really, you wake up and you feel like you haven't slept the whole night, but you have. How do you, I mean, you got a hectic job as well on top of it. I mean, you can't take the day off and say, I'm not going to go to work. How do you manage your fatigue?
That's a good question. I mean, you just, you are aware of it. I mean, there were times when I was so fatigued going into work that I would get up, drive to work, and then nap in the parking lot before going in, just because I was so tired I could barely stay awake driving to work, and then have to work, you know, 36-hour shift or something. So I'm not sure that I ever did cope with my fatigue. I just carried on carrying on. But nowadays, I think there are things I do that I really do think are good for me. And one of those things is a reasonable amount of exercise. And for a long time, I struggled with this thing. Well, I can't exercise. Look at me, I'm useless. I can't even run. You know, I used to run 5Ks in 21 minutes. Now I can't even do it in 40 minutes. And then so I'm not running anymore. And then sit on the couch and sulk. And it took a little bit of mental gymnastics for me to get my head around the fact that, well, you know, I could still walk. And when I couldn't run because my Achilles tendons were so bad, then I decided to take up paddling, and then I paddled until something gave up there, and then I took up boomerang throwing or frisbee throwing or something. But fatigue is really something that you have to manage with whatever you can. And no matter how sore you are when you've got angst, I mean, in my own experience now as a patient, if you do some movement, you're going to feel better, and a little bit more movement, you'll probably feel even better. And I think the absolute worst times of my life have been the times when I've been so, I don't know, excuse the Afrikaans word, gatvol with myself, that I just want to sit and do nothing, and then you're on a slippery slope to just becoming completely immobilized. So staying motivated to just do something, just breathe some fresh air, even if it's walking with the dogs around the block, even if it's doing a yoga, incidentally, is fantastic for people with angst because of the mobility and so on. But literally anything you do that is not sedentary is good for you. Swimming, of course, is great, but I could never swim. I've always called it controlled drowning. So swimming was never going to be a thing for me. But I find any other way to get active. And now if I can't run, like this week, I'm suffering a few glitches here and there. And so when I'm not running, and then I'm walking, and that's okay, because like walk, I still feel better when I walk than if I don't do anything.
That rings true, definitely. And tell me, what do you think is the biggest reasons for delay in diagnosis or AXPO in our country? I mean, it's all of our patients, I mean, there's hardly anybody that gets diagnosed 5 days after the initial symptoms. What do you think is the biggest reasons for the delay in diagnosis in our country?
I think I've spent a number of years wondering about this, and there are a number of them. But just to quickly highlight how bad it is that, so here you've got a young doctor go through medical school, turns out, and gets diagnosed at the age of 26. When I told and I knew my father had ankylosing spondylitis already, and I still didn't make the connection. Turns out I found out another 10 years later that my grandfather also had it and was sent home from Belgium when he was there during the war because he had ankylosing spondylitis. So even with that family history, the penny didn't drop. So the main things, and so once you know the pattern, it's the easiest thing in the world it's easier to recognize. I've been fooled a few times, but it's a relatively easy thing to recognize once you know the pattern. And the problem is, the public don't know the pattern. Like the public knows the pattern for a heart attack. You get left-sided shoulder pain, and it travels down to your hand, and you feel sweaty and short of breath. You know you're having a heart attack, and you phone the doctor. But nobody knows the constellation of symptoms that make up arthritis, and then more specifically axial spondyloarthropathy. So we also aren't very good at teaching that in university. That's the first thing. So if someone comes into you, what we get taught at university, for instance, as medical school, or we used to, hopefully it's better now, it certainly is better where I'm teaching, is, ankylosing spondylitis. So when someone comes into you with their spine completely bent over, and it's way too late, and of course everyone can make the diagnosis, but that's the pattern we've been taught. We haven't been taught the pattern to pick up the person before they get to that stage. When someone comes in with RA and their fingers are all bent, that's RA. But then by then really a policeman can make the diagnosis. And so, but we're being taught these very, very basic, no aspersions on policemen, they make excellent clinicians many times, but we get taught these very basic patterns, and we don't get taught in the way where the emphasis should be is, this is how you get someone early, this is how you investigate someone early and get them seen quicker. So those are two things. The third thing is, for me, frustratingly, is there's such an industry around backache and around joint pains in general. Such a massive industry of people trying to help some, and some just trying to make money. So you can buy any number of 1,000 different diet books on arthritis, or you can buy 10,000 different herbal remedies, or back massaging tools, or chairs that vibrate, or thicker mattresses, etc. There's a huge industry that's around backache, and there are many other causes for backache, and some of those will respond to some of those things I've said. But the point is that ankylosing spondylitis patients get lost in all of that, and we assume that our backache is the same as everyone else's backache. So that industry of alternative therapies leads people this way and that way, and everyone goes to see an orthopedic surgeon and thinks they need an orthopedic surgeon to put disassemble their spine and put it back together again, and that'll make it better, because that's kind of the way, almost in a way, the industry has pushed us. And so I think those are two of the big things. But then the third thing is, while it sometimes is specific, it's often very vague. And there are many different things that it can mimic, and many different things that mimic it. And often, if people examine, it's in angstspond, it's specifically so that it's not often that you find hard clinical signs of arthritis. So you won't look at someone with angstspond necessarily and find a huge swollen joint. It might just be pain because of the intercostal spots and that are tender, where your muscles and your bones attach, or your spinal inflammation. But people will do an X-ray and they'll see nothing, because early on there is nothing. They'll do an MRI, they might do an X-ray of the pelvis or of the affected joint or something, and they'll see nothing, and they'll say, well, there's nothing. Then they'll do a rheumatoid factor blood test, and of course that's going to be negative, so that's nothing. And then they say, well, you're not likely to have arthritis. And when they examine you, they also can't find anything, and so there's nothing. And so because it's really a symptomatic diagnosis, and the one examination that can help you to diagnose it is actually very specific and known to, I would say, 5% of doctors, is examining intercostal points and looking for tenderness in the intercostal points. So that's not something that gets, I was never taught that. The first time I heard the word enthesitis was once I developed the disease. And so because it's a poorly understood phenomenon, it's poorly taught. And that's why doctors don't even know it exists, never mind that they should go looking for it. Sorry, I'm going on too long, but those are some of the reasons why I think people struggle for a long time to get a diagnosis.
No, I don't think you're talking too long at all. It's lovely actually to hear your side of things. It's not often that we get a rheumatologist that also is a patient. We're going to put your pediatric hat on shortly. Not yet. I have another question for you. You were talking about there's this big industry that's built around backache and inflammation and all of that. And I have to agree, there's a massive industry. From a patient point of view, having asked for yourself, what is your take on diet in this disease? I mean, you know, we hear you eat this, it influences that, or if you don't eat bread, you're not gonna get symptoms. What is your take on diet and export? And personally, what do you find works and doesn't work?
Yeah, so that's a very important question. And the first point to make about that is we've always known there is a link between the gut and spondyloarthropathies. It's not a surprise that up to, you know, in some groups of patients, it's a very high percentage, up to 50%. I think I've read one study where it's 80% of people where if you actually scope their intestines with the colonoscopy, you would see inflammation in the gut, or at least if you did a biopsy there, you would see low-grade inflammation. So the incidence of gut pathology and this axial spondylitis, spondyloarthropathies are very, very closely linked. That's true. And that's why sulfasalazine is one of our first medicines we use, because sulfasalazine is actually an antibiotic, and people were trying to kill organisms in your gut that they thought were causing your gut to be inflamed. So while it is true that your gut and your bones are very closely linked, and that therefore your diet must be important, there is no specific dietary intervention that anyone can do that at this point that we know of, or that I've tried, that can fix things for you. So I happen to have a bunch of food allergies as well, and so I really have gone through many phases of trying not to eat this, trying to drink less beer, which is probably a good thing anyway, trying to, you know, not drink this or eat that or drink this or drink that, and through the years, and there really isn't one single thing. And now a little bit with my medical hat on, we know that the microbiome has become more and more important again. The guts, the organisms that live in your gut, we know they're very important, and we know they regulate and control and disrupt your immune system sometimes. And we know you have to have a healthy one, but we still don't really know. Well, let's put it this way. There's no specific diet that we can put you on that will give every single person a specifically healthy microbiome. So the only thing we can tell you is eat as raw as you can, as unprocessed as you can, as much plant-based as you can, and stay away from all the stuff we all love, which is another thing that our society kind of forces on us, is the kinds of foods we eat that we all love, that I love probably more than anyone else. A good old hamburger and or a hot dog or something with, and these things, we must stay away from processed foods like that and eat more healthy as far as that's possible. That way you will improve your microbiome to some sort of semblance of normality. You have a better chance of doing that. It's been shown, for instance, that taking antibiotics frequently as a child can disrupt your microbiome and lead to you having a higher susceptibility of getting a juvenile arthritis when you get older. So we know these things, but if someone tells you, I promise you that if you only ate turkey sandwiches and raspberry pips, you would be as healthy as anything, then you just know they're lying. There's no evidence that'll work for you. It might work for them, but it's not necessarily going to work for you. So there is no miracle diet at this point, or any miracle food, except go as close to nature as you can.
One of the things I wanted to chat to you about is, you know, we've just had World AS Day on the 8th of May, and our main theme for the year is Stronger Together. And I wanted to just touch on the emotional burden of having AXPAR. You know, it's a very silent disease because, I mean, unless you are, your back's, you know, unless you very far down the line, a lot of us walk around like normal people, but we could be in a lot of pain, and that obviously has, it's a bit like a seesaw. You know, you look great, but you don't feel great, and people will say, well, you're looking great, then you must be feeling great. And I
Yeah.
think in there lies that emotional burden of the disease. I thought we could just, again, talk to you, from a patient point of view, also having asked for what you think the emotional burden for yourself has been with a silent disease.
Yeah, a silent and an invisible disease. So I think one of the biggest things we want as people is just to be seen for who we are, and we don't want to be disbelieved. That's one of the most hurtful things for me. If someone doesn't take me at my word, or sort of casts aspersions on whether I'm telling the truth or not, or sort of says, maybe I'm embellishing something a bit, when it is something like this, then I find that very very hurtful. And I think that emotion of not being able to fully express yourself and having to hide behind some kind of smile for the camera kind of emotion, because that if you said something, people probably wouldn't understand or wouldn't believe you. That it's like that with many conditions, just like it is with something like depression. But you're smiling, how can you be depressed? And everyone who's ever been depressed knows that you smile because that's what people want you to do. And if you don't smile, they'll hassle you the whole day about looking so glum. So so that's the way. So I think that part eats at you. And no matter how much you tell your best friends, that this is what you're going through, they don't really get it, and you can't expect them to. So I think because they've never really experienced it, and the people who are close to you see the little signs, the people who are really very close to you, see you get out of bed in the morning and hobble to the kitchen. Those people kind of get it, or can read the fatigue on your face when you come home from work, or see that you just come home from bed and come home from work and fall straight into bed, and then do the same thing again tomorrow. Those people feel it. So and watching my wife suffer because of that was probably one of the worst things for me. And watching my kids worry about whether I might, they see me as pretty robust, and for them to sort of every now and again be reminded that I might not be feeling great, and seeing that sort of, but he looks fine, or seeing them worry is a big thing. So I think it's that's an emotional part of this illness that's very hard to overcome. And I think the only people who really will ever understand it is people like you who've been through the same thing, and maybe someone very, very close to you. So the other thing I wanted to say is the unpredictability of it. So you plan something, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and then boom, just when you're at your most excited, something happens and you can't walk anymore, or you just can't go through with a race or a mountain climb or something that you really wanted to do. That unpredictability, and then having to tell people, well, it's because of this, and then they sort of think, well, you probably wasn't that, it was probably just because you didn't feel like it. That kind of thing is really, that the disappointment gets me every now and again when I have to cancel on some big event, and then that's also makes you feel down on yourself because you're letting other people down.
Yeah, I think being a master bailer out is what happens. I mean, I've also had that.
Yeah. And no one wants to be that person.
Together with friends, and you have had a rough day, and this is just actually want to go straight from, like as you say, from work to bed. There's nothing in between. Work, bed, and that's what you want to do. And that is. I think there's a much more positive outcome for patients that's part of support groups. That's we obviously have the advantage of talking to fellow export patients, and we can share, chat like we are chatting, like you'll say something and I'll say, yeah, I know how that
you
works.
see it immediately. Yeah,
100%. So one of the questions I have for you is, I mean, we don't have the stats down 100%, but I did do a little bit of maths, and with a ratio of about 1 to 650,000 rheumatologists to patients, I mean, you guys have got such a massive job. I mean, there's far too few. I mean, we're not even talking about pediatric. Let's just talk about rheumatologists in general first. We're going to talk about pediatrics after this. But I mean, how are you guys coping with this massive load of, how do you ever get to everybody?
Well, that's the thing. I think rheumatologists, they're busy, and they cope. But the problem is, for the most part, because there's only so much you can do, and then you have to go home and rest, and the waiting times are long or whatever. But you will eventually get through most of the work that's supposed to be on your table. But I think the thing that always affects me is, I know for a fact in my heart, I know that's a bit of a weird statement. I don't have the numbers, as you say, but I have a very strong suspicion. I know in my gut that for every one patient that I see, there are, in pediatric case, probably 10 or 20 or maybe even 100 that are not being seen. Because I think this is possibly one of the most underdiagnosed conditions that we know of, for all of those reasons I mentioned. And I really think it's vastly underdiagnosed. If I reflect just on my own journey, and speak, and some of the kids I've diagnosed after a long time, how many kids I diagnose, and then the parents say, but I've had kind of the same thing since I was a child. And I'll be like, yes, you probably are. Then I look at their fingernails, see the psoriasis, ask them about morning stiffness, and their child turns out to be HLA-B27. I'm like, you should really see an adult rheumatologist, because so I know it's vastly underdiagnosed, and I think that's the cry. And we are never gonna have enough rheumatologists to treat all the rheumatology that's out there. That we can forget about. But what we need is to educate everybody who comes into contact with people with rheumatic diseases, make it as obvious to them that this is a problem as it is to them when someone comes in with a heart problem or a chest problem. So there's just a lot of education to be done, which is why a lot of my work and after hours activities and charity work and so on is focused on teaching. There's just never going to be a way around it. We can't wait until we've got enough rheumatologists.
And I guess the sad part of it is a lot of patients. I mean, if we talk, I guess it will apply to all the diseases. But if we talk about AXPAR specifically, a lot of patients could have AXPAR, but they could sit somewhere in a rural area where they don't even know what the word rheumatologist means, and they could be not diagnosed at all, and then they could end up having permanent fusion and have permanent damage because they just never had access to specialists and things like that. I think that's a big reality in our country.
Absolutely, on our continent, and the majority of people on this continent will never see a doctor. They'll see a primary healthcare worker who's a nurse or someone with that kind of training, rather, but the majority of people with this condition will never see a doctor. Never mind see a doctor who can diagnose AXPAR early. Yeah. So
let's talk about. I'm down for you to put your hat on. Let's talk about. Yeah, that's your doctor's hat now. Let's talk about the little ones now. I know we spend quite a lot of time talking about AXPAR. So when did you decide that you're going to focus on kids? Why?
Well, I've always known I wanted to be a pediatrician, or at least work with children. I did med school so that I could do pediatrics. And I've still got the hat on. It's just figuratively now. And I just can't look at myself with that on all the time. And I always knew I was going to work with kids. And then I went through my own diagnosis and realized how much better I got. And then I started seeing kids with rheumatic diseases, and slowly started realizing there are clinics for these kids, and went to the clinics, and then slowly but surely got more involved. But it only really grabbed me when I already had decided to do the training. But when I started really connecting with the patients and really seeing how much I could do, or how kids were suffering, even in Belgium where I trained before they got to a rheumatologist, and how much difference it made to them to get better. And how it wasn't impossible to get them better. It was actually a very feasible goal. And to think that you can take kids and change their lives in that way has been, that's when I realized the magic of what I'd started doing. But at that point, it hadn't really connected to me because I wasn't quite under control myself. So I didn't realize the potential for treating these conditions.
And maybe you can just explain to me in layman's terms. So as a pediatric rheumatologist, obviously you start seeing kids that's got, at what point can you then say, because it's juvenile, it's classified as juvenile arthritis, right? When you see younger kids. At what age does that turn happen where you now go, okay, you've got RA, you've got AXPAR, you've got psoriasis. When does that split happen?
So that's a very, very good question, because the split is completely of our own making. There is no split. These diseases can start in some cases very early, in some cases later. And so they can start in adulthood, or they can start in childhood, and some have a propensity to start early and some later and some in the middle. But the division is really artificial. While there are some conditions at the extremes that you only get in kids and some that you only really tend to see in adults, most are actually on a continuum. And so the division is artificial, but it is what it is. And we've called it 16 years of age is where you are deemed to now, if you present after that time, you now have the adult forms of the disease, and if you present before that time, you have the pediatric forms of the disease. And once you've had the pediatric form of the disease, the idea is that you always have that form of the disease. So in my case, it's very telling. I was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, but if I was diagnosed at 16 when I had it already, rather than at 18, my diagnosis would have been psoriatic, or no, my diagnosis would be undifferentiated JA if I'd presented a little bit earlier. So, but actually I've still got the same disease, haven't I? So it really, it's artificial, but pediatric rheumatologists will mostly start seeing you only up to the age of 16, but once they've got you, they probably will only let go of you at about the age of 21. You don't many of us, we have to say goodbye to many of our patients at about the age of 18, but sometimes you hold on just to make sure they get out of school or into university or something like that. So you want to see them off on a good footing.
And I keep on mixing up your AXPAR and your, and that's okay. So you said you had a family history of generations of AXPAR. I mean, it's not similar to myself. I mean, my Oma, she couldn't even look us in the eye. That's how crooked her back was. And her Oma as well. So it comes through, my AXPAR's through generations of it. And now you sit in a situation where you have your own kids. And I guess the question I'm going to ask you next is, how do you decide with your kids? Because like as grown-ups, we now look at our own disease and we go, oh, like me, I say the same thing as you did. If I was smart enough, could have just looked at my Oma and looked at my Oma's Oma and said, listen, I've got backache. This is a no-brainer. Now, as a grown-up, I now have 2 kids. So how do you as a parent now be smart enough to maybe see these things ahead of time, but also not sit and stress about whether they've got AXPAR or not have AXPAR? I think that's a question we've had a lot this week that our patients were asking. I mean, maybe specifically I can explain to you that on a personal level, my sons, because I was really, really sick before I got diagnosed, I was actually in bed for almost 2 years. So my boys were very aware of my disease. And like you said, your wife stresses, your kids stresses. My kids were also stressing. And You know, my eldest son kept on saying to me, Mom, but what if I have axpa? Can't I get to, you know, he was asking me eventually. At 16, he said, Mom, let's go do the test. So we tested him and HLA-B negative. And I said to him, Matthew, you can relax, it's fine. And then my youngest son had the same thing. When he was about 16, he also said to me, Mom, like my brother, I also want to know what's going on. And I had him tested, and he's HLA-B positive. So now I know, okay, well, I know the marker is sitting there, and now I feel like I'm sitting in the sideline watching him. You know, if he comes to me today and he says to me his back sore, then I'm like a doctor. How long has your back been sore? What have you been doing? You know, and I guess that's the question I have for you as a parent, trying to be educated. What do you do? And you must have the same concern.
Yeah, I've got 2 kids, and I completely share that. I've got an 18-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, and it's true. You just don't know. I've also got a brother and a sister, and with my diagnosis, you know, we didn't go ahead and test them. And fortunately, from this perspective, they've been fine. They haven't developed the same disease. Although I think my sister is starting to. If I hope I don't give away too many family secrets. But for my own kids, they like all kids do. They complain of joint pains frequently. They often have niggles and things going on. And as a rheumatologist, even as a rheumatologist, you don't really know what to do with that. But I've never had either of them tested. The fact is, I would rather not, so that we take the symptoms as because we know the symptoms, and you know the symptoms, and everyone who's got them now knows them, and we're you know, especially you and people in this group are advocacy minded. We're not gonna sit back and let our kids suffer for months and months. And the fact is, if you miss it for a month, it's not a problem. If you miss it for 6 months, it's not a problem. If you miss it for a year, you still won't have necessarily, or you won't likely have any damage. So you've got time to figure it out. So there's nothing really to panic about. If it's there, you'll see it, and you can then respond appropriately. Because the alternative is also true. If we do the test in all siblings or all children of people with angst, we'll have many kids who sort of sitting with the sword of Damocles over them and not knowing whether the sword's going to drop at some point or not. And in a way, at least being agnostic of the fact that of your HLA-B27 status, you have the same problem, but at least you're not. I think someone who's HLA-B27 positive is going to worry maybe a bit more. On the other hand, you as a parent are now going to be slightly more vigilant and attuned to, and you might make the diagnosis slightly earlier if your HLA-B27 positive child manages or does develop symptoms. But in the other hand, you know, again, you might now be over vigilant and over worried and stressing. And we know that there are many people with HLA-B27 positivity who never develop any signs of disease at all. And while most people with angst are positive, it's also not all of them. So even then, you've only got one more piece of the puzzle, and the proof will only really come when the symptoms come. So it's not an easy answer. I realize I haven't given you a straight answer at all because I don't know the answer. But my personal approach has been to sort of let them complain a little. If they complain a lot, I'll actually look at them. If they still complain after I've looked at them and I don't find anything, I'll look at them again. And then if they have something, then I'll probably investigate and take it further.
Yeah, and see now just go and complain, and they're tired most of the time, so you can't really take them.
No, fatigue in teenagers. I mean, it's a real problem, and musculoskeletal problems from our lifestyles, from sitting like this behind computers, carrying heavy bags. You know, it's a bit of a minefield. There's so many other things that can cause pain. So I look for specifically early morning pain, and and persistent in the same area. And then obviously any joint swelling or deformity would worry me. And backache should always worry every parent. If your child has backache, it needs to be investigated no matter what it is. Because there's so many other things that can cause backache in children that you really want to get sorted out. Not like adults with backache.
Yeah, it's a lot different if a kid's got backache as opposed to a grown-up. Yeah. No, I think that's very valuable information for everybody. And I guess I guess if my kids didn't specifically ask for me to get them tested, I wouldn't have really bothered. But it did bother. As you said, they wanted to know, and they know, and it's all good.
Yeah. I think in part, I don't think I've really told my kids about HLA-B27. I probably should after this evening's talk. So they know it kind of runs in the family. But to be honest, I haven't given them the tools to ask because I've sort of decided to take the worry on myself. But you're right. I should maybe mention it to them now that they're old enough to make a decision themselves.
Yeah, no, you only do the best. And what are you doing on the adventure side? Because that was one of our longest conversations we had when we first started chatting. Is I know you love adventures and things. Have you got anything in the pipeline that you're training for or looking forward to doing?
No, at the moment I'm struggling a bit with my health, so I've paused all planning because I keep paying entry fees and making plans. But one of the things I want to do in the future is a good friend, and I've got a couple of ideas, but it mostly involves mountain climbing. I've got a friend and colleague at the Arthritis Foundation who wants to climb a peak in Russia, and she was I just couldn't do it because of COVID, and I wasn't in a physical state to do it. So if that falls at a time when I can do it, I'd love to do that. But I'd love to climb some mountains in Africa to kind of, because there's something symbolic about climbing mountains, overcoming challenges and so on, to try and raise awareness again. But to be honest, I haven't thought about it much since I'm not climbing much at the moment. So, but we'll see. The future is still a long way ahead.
Yeah, and it's been a difficult year with COVID and everything. I think everybody's, mostly been keeping to themselves and been homeward bound and not really thinking about, more running day to day than thinking too far ahead, which I don't think is a bad thing.
No, it's actually been good in many ways. But for now, the biggest adventure is just managing to get outside is a good adventure at the moment. So.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so happy we had this chat and for your time, and I love talking to you about AXPAR because I know that it's not something that you get to talk about every day as you are a rheumatologist and you're so busy with kids. And it was so lovely for us to share our mutual emotions and feelings. And thank you for being open to the conversation. I see one of your kids in the background, and I know you're on leave at the moment, so I really do appreciate you taking this time. And then, of course, a personal thank you to you. You were one of the first people I contacted for the association, and you were very keen, and you are still a huge supporter of us. So we just wanted to thank you so much for your support, and a lot of what we do, we can't really do without the support, people like yourself. So that's been amazing. Thank you.
It's a great privilege, and I'm very and I'm humbled by what you've said this evening, and I'm very impressed with what you've achieved, and I'm very committed to helping you in any way that I can in the future, because I'm not aware of many support groups, especially specifically like this in the world, and there are many opportunities to work together to actually improve all of our lives and the lives of future generations, and those who don't even know that they have this disease yet, to go out and help the people who are in the position that you were in at your worst. So those are the people we need to find and help, and your organization will do so much to enable that sort of thing, and spreading the word and raising awareness. So I think that's very, very laudable, and I'm very pleased to be associated.
Fantastic. I think we will look forward to maybe planning a little adventure with you to raise some expo awareness. I think that's something we need to look at in the next year. Maybe we can go do something crazy in South Africa to raise a little bit of awareness.
Absolutely, let's plan.
Fantastic. I'm not seeing, there seems to be a little bit of a delay in our Facebook chat. So if there's any specific questions that comes in after the chat, I will probably send them through to you personally later in the week. But yeah, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening, and to everybody listening to us this evening. Get your training down. You've now heard from Professor. He can't be wrong. If he says exercise is the way to do it, then do it. And yeah, keep strong and exercise as much as you can. And thank you so much, Professor. It was a total privilege to have you with us this evening.
Thank you very much. Thanks.